Founders, welcome back to the 0 to 5,000 podcast, where we obsess over the convergence of human potential and business results. Today, our hosts Drew McClure and Jordan Mitchell have another insightful conversation for you. So let's jump right in.
All right, founders, welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are honored to be joined by Justin Cooke. Justin is the co-founder and CMO of Empire Flippers, the world's leading marketplace for buying and selling established and profitable online businesses. He also launched WebStreet, which makes online businesses a more accessible asset class by enabling individual investors to passively own internet businesses like content, FBA, and SaaS sites. And today, to tell us how he did that is Justin himself. So Justin, thank you so much for being here, my friend.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're pumped, man. So these are very unique businesses that you have started and gotten involved with. How did this come to be?
Yeah, so my business partner and I, this is for the Empire Flippers side, because that's the business that started first. We were working as a mid-level managers in an SEO company in the U.S. And, you know, we had some previous experience working with someone in the Philippines as kind of a virtual assistant. And as this company needed to kind of scale up, we said, look, we have a connection over there. Why don't we start hiring some kind of back office personnel in the Philippines to cut costs and like really kind of scale the business? And they went for it, and we started adding more and more people. We eventually went out there to kind of see the team and check them out and kind of see what they're up to. And we realized they were all working out of this one girl's small house. Like they had this like plastic table set up and like computer set up. There's like barely an AC blowing. We were like, oh my God, dude, we're running a sweatshop in the Philippines. This isn't good. So we were like, we need to fix this. We should like make this legit. So we went back to the US and we, at an Outback Steakhouse, we sat down with a napkin and said, like, how can we sketch out, you know, our own kind of entrepreneurial venture? How can we set out an outsourcing company that will work with our previous employer? And we pitched them on it. We said, look, we're going to go over there, be on the ground, working with the team in the Philippines and kind of scale this up for you, and, you know, add clients and kind of like build our business this way. And they went for it. So in 2009 for Joe and early 2010 for me, we moved to the Philippines to set up our outsourcing company. Got an office, you got legal agreements in place. It was wild.
Wow. Okay, so spotting an opportunity and having a business idea come to you is not unique, but having that on top of that, spotting the opportunity, being in a different culture, being across the world, seems like an even bigger kind of challenge or risk to undertake. Was that scary for you, starting a business and also having it be across the world?
So we'd had a failed real estate company previously, and that's kind of how we got our virtual assistant experience. And so I knew what it was like to fail in business. And if you've never failed before, if you've never started a business before and failed, you know, it sounds absolutely scary, miserable, sounds like the worst experience ever. And having gone through that, failed, and had to go get a job, tuck my tail between my legs, I realized it's not the end of the world. Right? There is a comeback from that. And so I think I was primed or in a position to where I was willing to take another stab at it. It'd been a couple of years and we were ready to you know, put our foot out there again. Now, moving to the Philippines to set up a company is a whole different beast. You know, but it was exciting, right? Like Joe and I had both traveled quite a bit. We'd been to Asia before, not the Philippines, but Asia. We were like, look, it's so interesting to like, you know, make dollars and spend baht or dong or pesos or whatever. You know, the lifestyle over there, you know, for like $4,000 or $5,000 a month is significantly better than you get in California, for example. So we knew that even with a small amount of money, you know, $20,000, $30,000 saved with regular income, we could go out there and, you know, try to make our way.
Yeah. Were the initial, I guess your first employees over there, were they skeptical about the two of you coming in, or were they excited and arms open? Like, what was that like?
Well, the first people we hired, we hadn't been there yet, right? So we had hired, I think, 8 people just fully remotely. And then when we visited them, you know, we said, look, we're going to set up an office. So we started going through the process of doing that remotely. And then finally, you know, while we were there, one of the things hiring in the Philippines directly is we'd have people come in, interview with Joe and I. And we had an office, so we were legitimate in that sense, but they're also worried about, you don't have your like paibig. It's basically your kind of like healthcare and all the things you need for like a real company. We hadn't set that up yet. And so they were skeptical about that. Even though we had an office, they're like, who are these foreigners coming in, trying to set up a company, call it a company? So it's easy, I think, if you go in and you're setting up like a 500 person office and you've got all the kind of like legal things in place. But we were two guys trying to run to the Philippines and hustle up a business, right? And so it's a little different. But yeah, I think eventually we got everything set up and we went through all the kind of like processes to get that done. And eventually it was fine. But initially I think they were skeptical. But once they realized we were paying people, had real people in the office and were doing real business, they were fine with that.
Yeah, and they weren't having to work at a girl's fold-out table with no AC too, right?
Yeah. That was wild. I mean, we were like, man, dude, this is not how we want to do it. We should go set up a real office. Funny enough, though, with this outsourcing business, it ultimately failed. It failed to launch, I'd say. We were running it. The previous employer we worked for started cutting back. So even though we had like a no-cut contract with them because we want to protect ourselves to some degree, when this is, post 2008, and so it was really hard for them to raise money. They started failing. They started cutting back on our business. So that's that's basically what started Empire Flippers. Was we had this this no-cut contract. We had a limited amount of other contracts, and so every time we'd add a new contract, we'd lose people with our previous employer. So we'd lose 4 people, right, and gain 3, and we weren't growing. So we had to look for something else to do. Well, we were at the point where we were going to have to shut down the business. And so we tried a number of things. One of the things we started doing is building niche AdSense sites. So niche websites that were monetized via AdSense. We could put those up with our small team in the Philippines and get them, making, $50 a month, $100 a month. And so we started like cranking out these small niche sites monetized by AdSense. And that's kind of how we started with, and we already had SEO experience. So building these sites is kind of how we started what became Empire Flippers.
And so then tell me what Empire Flippers is, or what was it at that point? Like, what did it start as?
Yeah, so Empire Flippers today is an online brokerage where we help people buy and sell online businesses. And those range from anything from, $30,000, $40,000, maybe they're making $1,000, $1,200 a month, up to, I think our biggest deal so far is around 13 million. We've done just under $500 million in total sales, so 480 million plus in total sales, over 2,200 deals total. We've got a team of just under 50 people, about 40-something people, 45, 46 people on the team, and they, live around the world. But that's not how we started, right? We started off as me and my business partner in a townhouse living together in the Philippines with a few people in an office building niche websites for ourselves. That's how it started. So, we were hustling it up. We were working from home or working from the office and trying to get this off the ground, making, $50 a month on one website, $100 a month on another. We started building out dozens of these every week. And that's kind of how we started. Like, I started building niche sites myself. Like, okay, how do I set up hosting? How do I get the content? What kind of WordPress theme do I use? I tried to figure it out. And then my business partner helped me scale that process I'd learned and transfer that to our team. So we chunked it out saying, okay, keyword research is this. We're going to have a team of people doing keyword research. Setting up hosting is another thing. Getting the content written or ordered, eventually we started ordering content, was another process. So we just chunked it out, what I had done myself, and then put that into a process for our team.
Okay. And then when did you spot the need or the opportunity for creating a marketplace, it sounds like, for people to buy and sell their businesses?
Yeah, so we were building these small sites on our own, and we said, look, we reached the point where we're making, I don't know, maybe let's say on total all the sites, this is early days, $1,200 a month or something. But we'd spent, maybe $10,000, $15,000. And so if we wanted to really scale it up, we would continue to go in the hole. We're going out of pocket. We weren't making any money. And we said, my business partner and I fought over this. Like, what do we do? And how do we scale it up? Continue like going in the hole, spending our own money to get this to a point of like relevancy, because $1,200 a month isn't going to get you very far, even in the Philippines. So we eventually settled on, let's try and sell these websites. And we started off, seeing if we could list these sites. But the problem was that listing these sites, there's places, eBay and other places you can go. The problem is that's not really built for selling websites, right? And the other problem is like, you'd have to list, okay, here's the URL, here's exactly, the site. And the problem with that is, as we started building a name for ourselves, people would go and see the URL and they would copy the exact business model. They would copy the exact niche, the keywords, the content, and then we would sell it off to a buyer who now has a dozen copycats. It got so bad, someone wrote like an ebook about how to go find Empire Flippers sites and copy them and make money. So we had buyers that were asking us, they're like, hey, I want to buy from you, but can you just not list the URL publicly? Can you not like share that beforehand so I don't have copycats to deal with? And so we said, oh, that's a pretty good idea. So why don't we just list the sites ourselves, right? We have a small audience, small but growing audience. Why don't we list the sites ourselves and see if people are willing to buy from us? So you can look, the original company is called AdSense Flippers. You can go to like the Wayback Machine or something. I can give you a link and you can see our original marketplace, which was super silly, but it was, here's the kind of niche, here's how much money it makes, here's a button you can click now and PayPal us the money to buy the site. Like it was that simple. But people were interested and people were buying these sites. So we could sell a site earning $100 a month for $1,500 to $2,500. And if we're creating a bunch of those every week, like it started to get significant. And it was a much better way for us to snowball kind of the earnings, right? Because we were able to like fast forward those earnings so we could reinvest that in building more sites at scale.
Ah, love it. Now, how did you actually protect, like what about that was different than what you were doing before? Because you still having to give people somewhat of a preview for what they're buying, right?
Yeah.
But you don't want to give too much away where somebody can just copy and paste your approach and your niche and whatever. So what was the difference?
So just not releasing the URL. To start, we were not telling them until they purchased the site. So when they purchased the site, they would get the URL. They knew generally what niche was in, the dog toy niche, say, for example, but they didn't know the specifics about the URL. They didn't know the specifics about the content. So that was the kind of like innovative approach we took. And it's really helpful from a buying perspective because you don't deal with a lot of copycats. The problem with a very small niche site is there's not a huge moat around it, right? You don't have a lot of defensive properties about the business that will keep other people from entering the space. This is a new burgeoning site. And keep in mind, many of the people buying these weren't like massive savvy investors, right? These are people that probably like some people in your audience, probably like you guys were at one point, and I was at one point, where you're like, are these internet monies real?
Right.
You know what I mean? Do people really like, okay, it says it makes $100 a month. Does it really? Will I actually get that money, or is the whole thing sketch? Right. And so I think that's a lot of our initial buyers were kind of in that phase where they were just like, I'm going to buy it, see what happens, see if I can just figure this whole internet thing out. And so over time, this is over a couple of years, we had people that would buy from us that would then start their own blog or podcast and start talking about how they were building sites, how they were buying sites. They ultimately started selling sites with us. And so that was really, I think, interesting. Now, I should say that our process for building sites was very specific, and it failed at one point. I think this is like 2012 or 2012, 2013. So, we had people asking, hey, you have this audience of buyers now, people that want to buy niche sites. I've been building along with you guys because you've explained the process on your blog and podcast and given it all away for free. I've been following it and been successful. Can I sell with you? And we were like, hell no, you can't sell with us. That's our moneymaker, right? Like, we're not going to let you sell your sites on our site to our audience. That'll take away from the sites we're selling. Eventually, though, when we realized the process for our creating these sites was less effective, previously we put in $50 and earned 200. Then they got down to like putting in $50 and earning, 60. And we're like, it's way less profitable. Why don't we let some people start selling with us? We'll take a risk. We'll take a small percentage instead of the 100%. We'll take a percentage of the deals that they do and then see if that works. And that's really what took off, because now it's not limited to our scale or our limited, creation process. It also opened us up to do non-AdSense sites. So e-commerce, ultimately Amazon FBA, SaaS businesses. It really opened the market up to us to allow us to find new buyers and new sellers in all these different verticals.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I mean, you are limited. It's kind of like Uber going back to somewhat being like a taxi. Like, I've got to own all my cars and I've got to, be responsible for it all, versus how quickly they could scale, where it's like, you got your own car, just come do it through our service. Right. Yeah. What I'm curious about though, is you've had, which is not unique to you, but what is unique to you is that you kept going. You've had many times throughout the story said, and we did this and then it kind of failed. And then we did this and it failed. But you kept pivoting and you kept learning. So how do you think about failure in terms of business?
Yeah, I mean, there's a point at which you're kind of throwing a lot of stuff against the wall to see what sticks, right? And as a marketer, like, I know that, you guys probably know that, you're like trying a bunch of things and you're going to see which ones kind of pan out. When you have something that is working, that's when you start to double down. You start to really kind of like move forward. So, our niche sites worked very, very well for a period of time. We scaled that up until it didn't, right? It started to fail. And so we had to pivot. We were forced to. And so when we allowed other people to start listing their sites, we realized the demand in the market. Now, we were still doing other things. We still had our outsourcing company going. We had a couple of other projects that were making money. We were selling content, for example, to other people creating niche sites. And at a point, and this was all making money, it was profitable. And at a point, we realized the demand for like an online brokerage or marketplace to buy and sell businesses was so large. There was so much attention around it, so much like, you just felt it. And we said, let's dump everything else. So we dumped the other parts of our business, either sold or just dropped or gave away. A Twitter background company we had, that was the thing back in the day. Our outsourcing company we sold. The kind of content and niche site selection services we dropped. We got rid of everything and really tripled down on Empire Flippers as a business brokerage. And that, we didn't know at the time how that would work out. We thought it was the right move, and ultimately it worked out for us. But I'd say, when you find something that has so much demand and has traction, then grab onto that and ride that horse.
It's really good.
Yeah, I love that. One, I'm thinking about the Pumpkin Plan book. The Pumpkin Plan essentially is talking about, hey, how do you want to grow the biggest pumpkins?
Mike Mikowitz,
right?
Was his name?
Yes, I can't. I never even try to say his last name. I appreciate you trying. I'm like, nah, I'm getting out of there. But yeah, it reminds me of that. Of like, yeah, we cut these smaller things that were actually profitable, that maybe we enjoyed, maybe we felt a sense of pride over. But we dumped those things. We saw this, we invested in this, and this was the thing that grew. I love that. And then also, it's just an interesting, it's something I just wrote down, which is oftentimes Drew and I are interviewing somebody on the podcast who set up a marketplace, who went out with the intention of setting up a marketplace. I want to become the Uber of fill in the blank. And we've interviewed a few of those over the years. And I just loved and wrote down, like, you stumbled upon being a marketplace business. I'm like, that is phenomenal that you're like, actually, we didn't want to do it, but then we got rid of our self-preservation and it really worked out for us. I think is cool.
Looking back, one of the problems with marketplaces, particularly double-sided marketplaces, there's one that's going to have a higher need than the other, right? So in our business, it's supply side. So if you have the supply, right, the buyers are going to come. Right now, you obviously have to market, you have to do all the things, but supply side seems to be the most critical factor, and it depends kind of where the market's at and stuff too. But yeah, that's the biggest thing. One other thing I'll mention is that, and it's been really innovative for our company and our next company that we started was that we had the office in the Philippines, and we would go into the office. I had a desk, and we would interview people there personally. And when the outsourcing company was struggling, we got to the point where we weren't able to keep the office open anymore. We weren't able to pay the bills, and we basically had to send everyone to go work from home. And in the Philippines, Joe and I had a townhouse. We sent everyone to go work from their own home, made sure they had internet and everything. But we felt like, oh my God, we're about to fail. I mean, this is like 2011 timeframe. And this is the point at which, like, it was pre kind of like remote work and everyone working online. And we thought, wrongly, that you have to have an office to be a real company.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you have to have an office, you have to have an address. If we have everyone working from home, we're just illegitimate. So like that imposter syndrome started kicking in. Where we're like, what are we doing? Are we going to have to go back to the US? Are we going to fail miserably? And what we realized is that you can set up a company where everyone's remote all the time. In fact, later on, I wasn't working from home. I traveled for 4 years with my now wife and just lived 2 months in Bangkok and 2 months in Saigon and just lived all over the place. And our employees now do the same thing. So we have a team of people that some are in the Philippines, some are Americans living in Saigon, Americans living in Medellin, a British person living in Prague. So we have people living and working all around the world, and we don't have any restrictions on their location, on even their time. We don't, put them on hours. So it's more about what they're able to deliver, and making sure they're. I mean, for salespeople, they have to be up certain times, so it's inconvenient when you're in Asia trying to call people in the U.S. But if they can do it, they can do it, and that was really innovative for us, and not only for the company, but for us personally. Like, for a lifestyle benefit, like, I can go to Europe for 2 months. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. So here's what I'm curious about on this side, the fact that it's worked out successfully for you. There's a book called Let My People Surf. Have you ever read that? But it's by Yvon Chouinard. He's the founder of Patagonia. And what was, fascinating about that is he got into business not wanting to get into business. He, by his own accord, was just a guy that loved climbing, rock climbing, and he loved surfing. But he noticed that the gear sucked. And so he started making his own gear. And he and his best friend started doing that. His best friend started North Face. He started Patagonia. And so he's like, all right, if I got to have a business, I still want a business where if people look outside and they see that the surf is great, they're allowed to go surf. So that was the vision, right? I want this flexible, thing where we can still do the business, but we can still have this lifestyle. But he said at the beginning it was a train wreck because they didn't actually know how to do that vision without 6 people having left for the day and no one was fulfilling orders. And all of a sudden they're backed up and late. And so it took some innovation and it took some, it took some innovation to figure out how we can do both. We get the privilege of getting to go surfing on a good day while knowing how to do it in a way that doesn't break the business, right? And so I think that's the struggle a lot of people are in today where they see the vision. COVID helped them see the vision of what you are already doing, which is, do we have to commute? Do we have to be in the same place?
Yeah.
But things break down when we don't know how to actually skillfully do that and balance both. So how have you guys kind of worked that process out where we can be wherever and work whenever without it breaking the business?
Yeah, so it's not we've solved that problem completely. It's it's fixed. Here's it's perfect. No, it's not. But what we start with is we measure the outputs, right? So what's the individual? What are the team supposed to accomplish? What are their goals? What are their weekly, monthly, quarterly goals? And are they accomplishing those? So that's really the thing we care about is like what's being output. Now, if the output isn't there, then we'll back it up a bit and go, okay, what are your inputs? Right? Here's where your inputs generally should be to accomplish this. Are you doing, okay, well, we found out you're not putting in the inputs. So you're not doing the dials. You're not doing the number of buyer seller calls you need to do. You're not taking it. Okay, now we can figure out where the flaw or the hole in the funnel is. Right? And so it's easier for like sales and maybe marketing. It can be a little harder on the engineering side, which I'm not really a part of, but it's a little harder there. But operational sales is pretty easy. Marketing's somewhat challenging, and engineering's much more difficult because they're such longer term in their projects.
That's a good insight that like certain aspects or certain types of businesses might find it easier to adopt the remote. Like I'm thinking in Patagonia's sense, like that's very much, you got to be there on the assembly line, like hands-on, making the thing, putting it in the box, shipping it out, right? Versus you just need to get on the phone and make some outbound calls, or you just have a project in front of you that you just got to get done by this time, right? So I can see the industry specific thing being a challenge that's different.
So we focus specifically on businesses that are not necessarily like ours, but that are remotely run. So for example, if you had a business, a lawn care business that was local, not like a lawn care marketplace, like I knew I had one of your previous guests on, but like a local kind of like in the tri-state area or whatever, then we wouldn't help you sell that business. We wouldn't list that business for sale. Only businesses that can be run remotely. So that's really important to us. Like that, we don't want only like a local buyer pool. It makes it much more challenging to have like regional buyers. We'd rather have a worldwide buyer pool because it makes it much more likely that the business will sell, that it'll sell for a higher multiple. So those are the kind of businesses we focus on.
That makes total sense. One of the things that I'm curious about just from your marketing skills and you had to start, you started a marketplace and then you had to go find the supply. You had to get trusted customers who said this isn't a scam, overcome the feeling of, is this a scam? Are these legit sites? All that stuff. How do you find and build a trusting audience, trusting customer base?
We had to build our own kind of buyer base because we were listing and selling our own sites. So when we controlled the supply to start, it made it a lot easier because like our whole marketing was focused on buy side. The other thing we did that was really interesting is I think that we were building these niche sites and had them profitable, and we just gave it all away for free. So at that time, it was pretty popular to give away like part of the process and hide the rest of it behind a paywall.
Yeah.
Right. Say, I'll give you little nuggets, but if you want the real juice, you're going to have to pay me. And so we kind of broke the mold on that and said, no, we're not going to do that. We'd rather, the attention was more important. We'd rather give everything away for free, talk very transparently about how we're building these sites. And what that did was people that didn't have the money or weren't interested in buying the sites could still follow along the process and create their own niche sites. So we were like, look, if you've got $5,000 to $10,000 to invest, you should have, and not all of your savings, but if you got $5,000 you want to take a flyer on and test this out, absolutely do it. Here's the process to buy. If you don't, if you got $1,500 or $800, whatever you want to start a business, here's exactly how you do it. Here's how you start the niche site. And so even for the people that weren't buying for us, they would promote our stuff. Right, because they would say, look, these guys are talking about exactly how to do it, giving us the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, and just telling us for free. I love these guys. And so, that 70, 80% of our audience would go out and kind of promote our business to the 20%, 25% people that would actually buy the websites.
That makes sense. Yeah. So you exchange the value for what pennies they might be able to pay you for behind the paywall to these will help us establish us kind of like an industry expert as well as a trusted person in the industry. That reputation was worth more than what they might or might not have paid for. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
If you were starting again and you were, let's say, not creating a marketplace, but someone's listening here and they're like, I do want to create, a digital business. I do want to create a business online that I can work wherever. Where would you put their head? What do they need to be thinking about?
It's difficult. I mean, I don't deal with a lot of startup founders today, people that are looking to start their own business. I mean, most of our business deals with kind of like the end of the process. So you've already built a business, you've already been successful. It's one of the reasons, so when we go to conferences and we speak or we do podcast interviews, a lot of times we're kind of viewed as we can talk about the aspirational stories of people that have been successful. But what we don't see, because we're not frontline guys, is we don't see all the people that are kind of just trying to look for a business idea, or the people that start businesses and fail, right? I think even our employees, Joe and I, my business partner, all we see are these successful, profitable businesses at the end of their life cycle looking to sell. And so we've got this really kind of biased view of online entrepreneurship. We're like, everywhere I look, there are these successful businesses. This guy built $1 million business. This guy built a $5 million business. It all works for everyone. And so, it's tough. I have to remind myself that that's not the case. There's lots of people that start and fail businesses. So that being said, that's a huge caveat that they're out there.
Yeah.
But some of the things we're finding right now are, particularly in the e-com or the DTC space, so starting an actual e-com brand is interesting. Something that's not just kind of a easily recreate a product where you actually go to China, you're working with them to kind of create the product is helpful. One of the hotter businesses we've been selling recently are the Kindle ebook businesses. So people creating a whole bunch of Kindle ebooks in particular niches and have series of books. That's interesting. With ChatGPT and AI, what's the long-term survivability with that? I'm not sure, but a lot of people have kind of created these types of businesses that are successful today and making money.
Well, okay. So here's what interesting. Now that I know a little bit of what you get to see day in and day out, I found interesting. I don't know how I went down this rabbit hole. I'm a generalist, man. I'm always learning random stuff, seeing random stuff. But at some point, I learned about how counterfeiters, people that work for the FBI, how do they get really good at spotting a fake? And what I found interesting was they spend less time studying fakes and they spend all their time studying the real deal. They get so familiar with the look, the feel, the texture of a real dollar bill that they spot almost instantly a fake, right? So what you get to see is the real deal every day. You get to see the businesses that have worked, the ones that are actually profitable, the ones that are worth selling. What have you learned by looking at those, right? What do they have in common? What are some things you're like, man, I see this in common with all these real deal successful online businesses?
Yeah, a lot of businesses that are successful start off, they niche down. So they're focused on a much smaller niche rather than doing, let's say you want to build a site in the health or wellness space, right? A business or a brand in the health and wellness space. You don't want to cover the health and wellness space. That's outrageously big. And so getting any traction in a very, very large, broad niche like that is going to be really difficult. Maybe if you're backed and you have VC money, if this crazy big idea, maybe you can do that. I'm not saying it won't work, but generally for us, for me and you, for most people, that's probably not going to work. But if you really narrow it down to I love CrossFit, and I don't love the the jump ropes that are out there for cross. I'm going to create a new jump rope, an innovative jump rope. Like that's a niche that is much easier to target, much easier to get traction in. It's a lot easier to advertise to, because advertising to health and wellness or like personal finance, and as another good example, is super expensive. If you want like personal finance followers, customers, whatever, it's going to cost you a ton of money. But if you're looking for a very specific niche, then it's much easier. It's a much lower cost per acquisition for customers. So, I mean, generally when you're starting a business, you want to narrow your scope. We did this too, right? So we, when we were building our business, we called ourselves the 20X guys and the like basically under 10,000 guys. So we sold a lot of sites that cost under $10,000, and we'd sell for 20X, meaning 20 times their net monthly profit. So if they're making, $100 a month, they would sell for $2,000. $200 a month, they sell for $4,000. And we were known for this on the very first couple of years we started. Now this became a problem later. When we tried to expand out of that. I mean, even 2-3 years after, we were no longer doing that. We were selling for larger multiples and much larger businesses. They were like, oh yeah, they just sell businesses under 10,000, only 20 times monthly profit. And so we had to like overcome this, kind of niche we'd put ourselves in. So, but that's a future you problem. If you're just starting out, who gives a shit? It doesn't matter until you actually are successful. And like, if you can't sell products or services to your customers, that's the whole game. So like find the easiest way to do that and crush that, because you'll have future problems. You need to like, pivot out of a particular niche or a sub niche that you've selected. Screw it. You can do that later. Be successful now.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's a future you problem. And it's an easier problem. Like, sure, it's a problem, but it's an easier problem to just slightly change the reputation of your success versus just trying to be successful at all. Right. So
yeah, a similar thing, Joe and I used to be the face of the company, everything on the company, right? And so over the last 3 or 4 years, we started to back out of that for multiple reasons, one of which it makes your business easier to sell. If it's always you out there promoting the business, if someone else buys that, they're going to, and we know this because we sell a lot of businesses, they're going to require your time after the fact. So a lot of times there are earnouts in place in the business. Sometimes it's profit-based, sometimes it's time-based. But as an entrepreneur, if you are the face of the company or you have personal branding that's tied to the company, they'll either require you to continue or require use of your personal brand. So we started backing out of the business. And so that was a bit difficult too. Who else do you put in place and how do you do that? Looking back, I think that was probably a mistake even today, because yes, it makes the business harder to sell. It makes it a bit more challenging. You have to stick around a bit longer. But there's something really good about having like a founder-led business, right? And so when it's less founder-led, I think that you lose something. And so I actually, for something like today that we're dealing with that I think I regret a bit, I think I regret that.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I mean, it does seem like the trend has been in the last 5 to 10 years that people are used to seeing a face and a personality attached to their favorite trusted brands. You know, back in the day, like, you didn't really know beyond GE who's at the head of it. Like, unless you're in the business industry and you're like Jack Welch, right? But everybody else, I don't know, it's just GE. It's a trusted name. But now you want to know who's with that. What's the personality like? Even like, what are their likes and dislikes and political interests and all that kind of stuff, What
are their values?
Values.
Like, we do this both externally, but also internally. So 2 things that I think would probably help some of your listeners, or at least it's something that was successful for us that I'd really like to pass on. One of the things was we would do like strategy planning, and it started off, again, Joe and I in a townhouse sitting down for a couple hours. But we'd start with like the long-term vision, right? The like 3 to 5 year, big, hairy, like where are we going to be? What would be super successful? What would we consider super successful? And that's like, what does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? Like literally, where are we and how do we feel about the business at that point? We work backwards. We say, okay, that's the long-term, the 3 to 5 year plan, long-term plan. What do we need to do this year to hit that first goalpost, to hit that plan? And then what do we need to do next quarter, and what did we do last quarter to hit our 1-year goal? So we started this literally on a Google Doc. It was maybe like a page and a half for the first one. We've got a record of it over the last, 10 years or so. And then we do it every quarter. We do this quarterly. And then we set our long-term plan, which doesn't change much, right? Over the years it does, but it doesn't change quarter to quarter that much. then your annual plan, and then what you did last quarter and what you're going to do next quarter. It started with Joe and I. We ended up involving some of the employees we hired. We ended up with all of our employees. Then we narrowed it down to the management team. Now our management team does that without us. We have input with the person that runs the company, but like it's just the three of us, and then he sits down with the crew and works it out with them. So that's been wildly successful, I think, in that we don't always hit our goals, but it keeps us directionally right? So it keeps us like heading in a direction, and we zigzag to get there, but directionally we have like a long-term goal that we're heading towards, and that's changed over time, but that's been really helpful. The second thing we've done is, I mean, people call them team retreats, but when we started off, we would meet, it was aggressive, 3 times a year for a month in various locations. So we did like a month in Phuket, we did a month in the Philippines, we did 3 weeks in Hong Kong. We'd get this is a small team, there's probably like 7, 8 of us at this point for Empire Flippers, and we get our people together in various locations. Now we pared that down to twice a year and anywhere from like 7 to 10 days at this point. But it's been super successful in like providing like internal leadership to the team in a fairly high stress environment. When people are selling their business, it is really, I mean, a lot of times people do this once, twice, 3 times in their lifetime. And so you don't do it a lot. It's nerve-wracking. When you get to the very end and you're like transferring your business over and you haven't received the payment, oh my God. Even friends of mine, like personal friends of mine that have sold their business, get super sketched out at that point. Am I going to get paid? When am I going to get paid? Are we sure the wire's coming through? Like all these nerves kick in. So when it's so stressful for our customers, it's really good to get our team together and like have them drink a beer together, right? Like play games together, goof around, right? Because you're dealing with high stress situations, and we're remote, so you're like calling someone in San Diego when you're in London, you're not seeing each other face to face, and it's easy to get kind of crabby with each other. So getting together twice a year and like being able to like break bread, do a steak dinner, have some drinks is super helpful in like easing the tension and making sure we're a cohesive team.
Yeah, man, that's killer. That's actually, Drew and I both worked remotely. I've been working remotely since 2016, so not as long as you. But during that time, working remotely, one of the rules, I guess it was very similar, is we got together quarterly, face to face, and we did do the strategy planning. We did some, tactical things for the business, but for the most part, if I reflect back on it, you go, you know what? The most valuable thing was breaking bread, remembering that they're human, laughing with them, like it was so easy. And that would probably be my one thing for like, hey, do the remote work thing. But if you never see each other, in person, you can have a challenge, which is you start to tell yourself stories when you're sitting all alone, that person on the other side.
My business partner, Joe, and I started Empire Flippers. We have another company called webstreet.co.
Yeah.
And we have a third partner on that, Mike. We're actually flying on the 7th. Joe's coming here from the Philippines where he lives. He's going to fly here, hang out a couple of days, and then we're flying to Buenos Aires to meet up with the team in Buenos Aires for like 8 to 10 days. And so we were just talking about what we're going to do. I think there's some hiking, a little bit of kayaking, some dinners, but then a lot of work. Right. And so during the week we work, and the weekends on the end, we're going to do some party fun stuff. But it's really great to get with the team. And they got like maybe just under 20 people now. So being able to meet with them, almost everyone's going to be there in person, getting some work done, having some fun together is really motivating for the team and for us, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like Jordan said, we've noticed the further you are separated, the more room there is for conspiracy theories, personal conspiracy theories. You had this intention behind that email, all that kind of stuff. And so for the people that are still in traditional offices and working together, we're like, it is good. You need to take a retreat. You guys need to get out. But it's more of a mandate if you're remote, where it's like, it probably needs to be longer. It probably needs to be more often, just to keep that, like, I know you. I know who my counterparts are. They're human.
You're a real person. Like, you're not ripping me on Slack or email. You're actually, I understand what you're going through. Yeah.
So one of the interesting things was when I was speaking at that Chick-fil-A conference I told you about, I was talking with Andrew Cathy backstage, and I was just asking him some questions. And one was like, they had just gone more remote than they ever had before. This is a few years ago. COVID was still, a kind of a big thing. And I said, what's something you didn't expect? And he said, the level of drama has increased. And I was like, all right, that was it. That was my suspicion. And he was like, it makes sense now, but we didn't expect it then, that just the amount of interpersonal drama has increased when they see each other less often. And it's exactly what we're talking about, right? Like, there's just...
Well, the larger team you grow too, you tend to get a bit more of that, right? And then you get a bit more corporate. You need to add some levels of HR. We fought and resisted that. Not HR, but like we fought and resisted the kind of corporate pull quite a bit. I think it's important to look, we're not VC backed, so we don't have some mandate to grow at all costs. Yeah. I think that's really important too. And there are businesses that need to raise money to grow, whether because it's like such a hot market or they should be forced to drive forward very quickly and innovate and take higher risks. But because we're bootstrapped, we didn't feel the need to do that. And I'm glad in retrospect that Empire Flippers was bootstrapped and we didn't raise money because we didn't have a mandate to grow at all costs and take much higher risks otherwise. I mean, this is a business that we can keep for a very long time. We'll potentially sell it, but like we don't have to, and we're not forced to, and there's no investors breathing down our necks. One of the things I should mention to your audience is like a lot of times, we're not smart enough to come up with like new products or new services necessarily. We have customers that like bang our heads about it, right? Until we kind of like realize, oh, that's probably a good idea. Like, for example, people want to sell their sites at Empire Flippers, and we resisted it, right? Because we want to make our own money, but also just we were like, I'm not really sure that's the direction we want to head. And eventually there was so much request for it that we did it. There's another thing to where like, the market on buying and selling businesses is limited to some degree. It's growing, and COVID helped our business, right? We talked about like your business, but like COVID was a boon to online businesses and entrepreneurship. And so we were selling a lot more businesses, but there is a limit to who can buy a business. Like my aunt reached out to me many years ago and was like, hey, I like what you're doing. Can I buy like an online business? And my aunt has zero experience like running an online business or with FBA or e-commerce or whatever. I was like, I mean, you can, but you got to go get some skills first. You know what I mean? And like, so we had a lot of requests from people that had the money, but didn't have the time or the skills to run an online business saying, hey, how do I get involved? And we were like, go figure it out. Go read like Niche Pursuits or Smart Passive Income or whatever. Go read one of those guys and spend some time figuring it out and come back to us. And like, that's kind of a shitty answer to people that are coming to you with money and interest, right? And sending them elsewhere to, hey, go figure it out and then come back when you're ready. So we were like, that's a problem we really need to solve, a high quality problem. So we were like, what can we do? So we realized, we have all these like successful founders, people that have grown and then sold their business. We know the details behind how much money they make, how they were successful, the process, how many times they've been successful. So we've got a unique secret advantage of like having this, stable of like successful entrepreneurs. What if we could pair like passive investors with the stable of entrepreneurs that already have successful businesses? And so we ended up creating a company called Webstreet, webstreet.co, where it's basically a marketplace for passive investors and successful operators or entrepreneurs, right? So let's say you built a business, sold it for $1.5 million, an e-commerce business. Now you want to do it again, but instead of putting all your money up front to buy a business, you can put up a small percentage of that and have a bunch of passive investors back you to buy a business, and not just do it once, do it maybe every quarter or twice a year, and you can start building up a network of online businesses that you run that have now been invested in passively. So we started Webstreet, there were three things we needed to figure out. Number one, can we find enough operators to make this viable? Number two, can we find enough investors interested to like fund the businesses they're going to purchase? Mm-hmm. And number three, can we deliver a return to investors, right? Because if we get all those things right, this is a huge win because it opens up our market. And so we told investors from the start that want to get involved. We're like, I don't know if we can answer those three things, but if you want to take a stab at it with us, this is what we're doing. And we're just super transparent about it. Like, I don't know if it's going to work, but this is the goal. This is the plan. And we had enough people go, yeah, okay, I'll try that. I want to try it with you guys. So we've raised, I think, $33 million right now for all these operators. Successfully purchased about $22 million. We have some other portfolios that are in process of purchasing, about $22 million worth of businesses, and have like 40 acquisitions under the operators. So yeah, that's been that I think is super scalable because it's passive investors with a small network of people that we already know had success. And so it's much more scalable, I think.
I love that. I'm looking at the Web Street website right now, and very exciting, very cool. You also made a heck of a transition, which was beautiful, from Empire Flippers to Web Street, and just that story is killer, right? And spotting that problem. I was so curious. I was about to ask, like, hey, what are the skills needed? But now I'm like, oh man, we're talking about Web Street. You don't need the skills. Just go invest. They created we created an app for that.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, you have to have investing skills, right? And so now you need to be able to like vet deals and like compare one to another. So it's a different type of skill set than like due diligence on a purchase, right? For Webster, we only take accredited investors. Like we're not taking Tim's college fund or anything like that. It's only accredited investors. They can put in, I think it's 60,000 minimum per deal, and we have maybe half are repeat investors. So we get people that invest pretty regularly, either 2 to 4 times a year. We do it like every quarter. We raise a new round. We've got different, FBA, we've got SaaS businesses in there. We've got like a nice mix of different businesses and different operators.
That speaks to the quality of the investments if you're getting that many repeat investors, right?
Yeah, well, this is a real estate model too, right? So they do this in real estate model with real estate investment trusts and with like larger portfolios. There's a bunch of businesses out there that do this kind of thing. And Masterworks is a good example where they do that with art, right? They do it with art, and they bank on appreciation of art, where they have like you can put $20,000 on a Picasso, for example. Our thesis though is that what's different about this is these are like passive cash flowing investments. So we're not solely relying on appreciation of the asset. This asset returns cash and dividends to investors every quarter. Now, what's different though? A lot of times, if you're this can like tax things, but like if you're investing in something that you expect the money to like kind of roll in, there's a tax savings to you. Ours doesn't. So we deliver dividends or cash flow to investors every quarter. So if you're expecting it to kind of roll up in that single investment, this isn't for you. If you're looking for like a cash flow investment, this is a better option.
One of the things that is like a underlying thing that I really like about you and your story is the repetitive theme of I lost my self-preservation and my business grew. Right. And so there were a few times where that happened, where you made a self-preservation decision, where it's just like, hey, we want to sell our things. And you're like, wait a minute, we could actually share, right? I want to choose sharing, and my business grew. And there were a few times where I just marked down that like, hey, as I kind of lowered my self-preservation, that actually gave me a lot of the things that probably I was hoping for in terms of my bigger goals in life. And I think that's just a low key as just an individual, right? There's lots of strategy, there's lots of skills that you're going to need to be successful, but there's also going to need to be a state of mind and a story of like how you carry yourself that's also going to help you be successful. And I think that's just a low key characteristic that actually is part of your story that's really helpful. And I really appreciate seeing that. And it's been valuable to hear throughout your story.
I think we have a tendency to like kind of like focus on what can we do, how can we make money,
yeah.
Like, this business needs to work, yeah. And every time we're doing that, it tends to backfire. And we found we're much better when we're kind of like open about like trying to provide value to our audience, to our listeners. I asked you before we got on, right? It wasn't a question of like, how can I sell my shit better? It was like, how can I better provide value to your audience? Tell me about your audience and like who they are and like what I can speak to, right? Yeah. So I think that's going to be way more helpful. And you don't have to be like constantly selling yourself. Like if you're just trying to help other people, generally it comes back. I hate to be that guy, but like it seems to be true. The more value you put out there,
that's the beauty.
Yeah, it's not like a gospel or one of those like prosperity preachers.
Yeah, you guys can give the Joel Osteen, right? We'll have a link for you. No, not to Joel. But honestly, the results, and that's why I was celebrating it, is like, you just shared that was a characteristic that you lived out in multiple places. And we just heard about positive results that are happening, that have happened and are continuing to happen. So I think it's a fact, it's fair.
I love it. I want to end with just one question we can go anywhere with. So the idea or the question is there a habit you have professionally or personally that you think has an outsized return on your life?
Yeah, I didn't follow this for a long time. I didn't focus on my health a ton when I was kind of like building the business initially. I always passed on it. I said, look, I'll worry about my health when I'm rich, right? Like I'll just let me just make some money first. Let me be successful first, and I'll worry about that later. And that was a really big mistake. I spent a good portion of my 30s being overweight, unhealthy, because I was so deeply focused on the business. And what I didn't realize at the time, I knew intellectually, but I didn't actually physically represent, was that there is a balance between kind of like health and wealth. And like there is a, you can't be as successful as you want to be in business if you're unhealthy and not doing well physically, right? And so really kind of backing down over the last couple of years and focusing on my health has been super helpful. I didn't know how bad I was until I started to get much healthier and feel so much better. And it just makes me that much more effective, I think, in business, honestly. So
what were the specific biggest benefits? Was it confidence? Was it energy levels, stress management, all of it?
Energy levels and stress management. I'd say I had a bit of a health scare. This is maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where I had like a heart, not a murmur, but like some heart thing when I went to a physical. And that significantly cut down on my confidence level. Like up until then, not that I was invincible, but I just felt, I was overweight, whatever, little, definitely out of shape, whatever, but just like, whatever. I was happy-go-lucky, right? But that health scare really kind of set me back and hurt my confidence. I think created some anxiety in my life and made me just way less sure and quite a bit more uncomfortable. And so that was tough because I never dealt with that before. I'd always been pretty confident and, somewhat successful in business and doing well. And then I had this thing where I was like, I have a real health scare. And it wasn't. Ultimately, it was fine. But it scared me enough to where I was like, oh shit, like that's really important. Who cares about your successful business if you're dead, right?
Right.
So
richest man in the graveyard.
On that is, I just think that like if I could go back, like, hey, spend some time, not all your time, but some time on nutrition, on working out, on being physically active. Don't let it slip over year after year. It's a little decrease, right? You gain a little bit of weight, you become a little less active. You gain a little bit of weight, you're like, you know what? I don't want to go do that hiking trip. You know what? I think I'll play video games instead or something. You know what I mean? And you're just like, over time, over decades, that's really bad for you.
Yeah. And it's almost like you forget what good felt like,
Yeah,
and then you get back to somewhat eating good and moving, and you're like, oh, this is normal energy
so
levels.
Much better. Yeah,
this is clear thinking, right?
Mm-hmm. And it cuts down like the anxiety. It started to kick in, the kind of a health scare, whatever that I had. The health scare went away, but the anxiety stayed. And I was like, oh my God, this sucks. And so that's decreased significantly. I feel so much better. And I feel in a much better position to be helpful and useful to our audience, to our team, and to our partners that we work with.
That's awesome, man. Well, Justin, thank you so much for making time, coming on here, sharing your success, your insights, your stories. Man, this has been a really fascinating conversation, and I'm happy that you were here.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Founders, thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and hop into our monthly founder email so we can ensure you stay on the edge of peak performance and massive business results.